The quiet exit. The small roadside diner was almost empty, wrapped in the soft hum of an old refrigerator and the faint clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Rain tapped gently against the windows, blurring the streetlights outside into long golden lines. A woman sat alone at a corner table, her shoulders slightly hunched, her eyes moving nervously toward the door every few seconds. Across from her sat a little girl, no older than 6, swinging her feet quietly under the chair. They had ordered nothing but a single glass of water. The woman's name was Sarah. Her coat was thin for the cold evening, and her hands trembled slightly as she checked the time on her cracked phone screen. She leaned closer to her daughter and whispered, "We'll leave soon, okay? Just stay quiet." The little girl nodded, though her eyes drifted around the diner with innocent curiosity. At the table next to them sat a man in his late 30s, finishing a warm plate of food. He looked tired, like someone who had just ended a long workday. His jacket was dusty, his hands rough from labor. He didn't pay much attention at first. People came and went all the time in places like this. Sarah stood up slowly, glancing toward the cashier who was busy arguing with someone on the phone. She picked up her worn bag and gently reached for her daughter's hand. Her plan was simple: leave quietly before anyone noticed they hadn't ordered food. Hunger was something she had learned to hide, especially in front of strangers. But as she turned to go, the little girl stopped walking. Her gaze was fixed on the man's half-finished plate, steaming rice, a piece of bread, and a small bowl of soup. The girl didn't say a word, but her eyes told a story louder than anything she could have spoken. They were wide, longing, and painfully honest. The man noticed. He looked up and caught the child staring. For a moment, there was silence, not uncomfortable, just heavy with unspoken understanding. Sarah quickly pulled her daughter closer, her face flushing with embarrassment. "Don't look," she whispered urgently. "It's not polite." The man's eyes softened. He had seen that look before, years ago, when his own younger sister used to go to bed hungry after their father lost his job. It was a look no child should have. Sarah tried to keep walking, but the man gently pushed his plate forward and spoke quietly, his voice calm and kind. "Excuse me, there's too much food here for one person." He paused, choosing his words carefully so she wouldn't feel ashamed. "Would you like to sit for a minute?" Sarah hesitated. Pride and desperation fought silently inside her. She didn't want charity. She didn't want pity. But her daughter's small hand tightened around hers, and she felt the faint tremble of hunger she had tried to ignore all evening. The diner seemed to hold its breath. The man didn't push. He simply smiled gently at the little girl. "It's cold outside," he added softly. "No rush to leave." Sarah looked into her daughter's hopeful eyes, then back at the man's sincere expression. Something in his tone, respectful, not judgmental, made her pause. Slowly, she sat back down. The little girl's face lit up with quiet relief. And in that simple moment, a stranger noticing, a mother allowing herself to stop running, and a child finally seen, the night began to change in ways none of them expected. A meal shared, a story unspoken. Sarah sat stiffly at the table, unsure where to place her hands. The little girl, Amina, watched the steaming food with quiet amazement, her eyes wide but cautious, as if afraid it might disappear. The man gently slid the plate closer to them, his movements slow and respectful so they wouldn't feel pressured. "Please," he said softly. "It would make me happy if you helped me finish this." Sarah forced a small smile, still hesitant. Years of struggle had taught her to expect judgment from strangers. But there was none in his voice, only warmth. She nodded to Amina. "Say thank you," she whispered. "Thank you," Amina said shyly, her voice barely louder than the rain outside. The man introduced himself as Imran. He didn't ask too many questions at first. Instead, he talked about small, ordinary things, how the rain always made the city quieter, how the diner's soup was the best in the area, how long days felt shorter when you shared a meal with someone. His gentle conversation slowly eased the tension around the table. Amina took her first bite carefully, then another, and soon her quiet hunger turned into soft, happy focus. Sarah watched her daughter eat, and a mix of relief and guilt crossed her face. She had tried so hard to stay strong, but moments like this reminded her how heavy life had become. Imran noticed the tiredness in Sarah's eyes but chose kindness over curiosity. After a while, Sarah spoke on her own. "We didn't plan to come here," she admitted quietly. "Our bus was delayed, and we had nowhere warm to sit." Her words carried more weight than she explained. Imran listened without interrupting, simply nodding in understanding. He had met many people whose stories were hidden between the lines. Amina looked up suddenly. Mama says we're going to a new place, she said proudly, her mouth still full of bread. Sarah's eyes flickered with a mix of hope and worry. Yes, Sarah added softly. A small room, if everything works out tomorrow. She hesitated, then gave a faint laugh. Life changes fast sometimes. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping louder against the windows like a distant drum. The diner owner turned on an old radio, and soft music filled the quiet space. For the first time that evening, Sarah relaxed her shoulders. She even took a few bites herself after Imran insisted gently. As they talked, Imran shared a little about his own past. Growing up in a crowded house, learning early how strangers could sometimes become unexpected family. His honesty made Sarah feel less alone, and the conversation began to flow more naturally. Amina finished her soup and leaned back happily, her small face glowing with comfort. She pulled out a tiny crayon from her pocket and began drawing on a napkin, a little house with 3 stick figures holding hands under a bright sun. She handed it to Imran with a shy smile. "For you," she said. Imran accepted it carefully, as if it were something precious. "This is the best gift I've had all week," he said warmly. Sarah watched the moment quietly, her eyes softening as she realized that kindness still existed in unexpected places. Time passed unnoticed. The rain slowed, and the diner grew warmer, filled with the simple comfort of shared food and honest conversation. For the first time in days, Sarah didn't feel like she had to rush or hide. And though none of them knew what tomorrow would bring, that small table had become a place of safety, a pause in the chaos of life, where 3 strangers began to feel less like strangers at all. A quiet kindness that changed everything. The rain had almost stopped when Sarah finally checked the time again. The diner clock showed it was getting late, and reality slowly returned to her thoughts. She gathered her bag, now lighter somehow, even though nothing inside had changed. Amina sat beside her, warm and full for the first time in days, still holding the crayon she refused to let go of. "We should go," Sarah said gently, her voice calm but uncertain. She didn't want to overstay her welcome, even though the small table had begun to feel safe. Imran nodded with understanding. "Of course," he replied. "But wait 1 minute." He stood up and walked quietly toward the counter, speaking to the diner owner in a low voice. Sarah watched from a distance, unsure what he was doing. She felt a familiar wave of worry, she never wanted to feel like a burden. A few moments later, Imran returned carrying a small paper bag. He placed it gently on the table. "Some bread and fruit for the road," he said simply. "The rain might start again later." His tone was casual, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Sarah hesitated. Pride whispered to refuse, but gratitude pulled her in the opposite direction. She looked at Amina, whose hopeful eyes were fixed on the bag, then back at Imran's sincere expression. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice filled with emotion she tried to hide. They stood up together and walked toward the door. Outside, the street glistened under soft streetlights, and the air smelled fresh after the rain. The night felt calmer now, less heavy than before. As they reached the sidewalk, Imran paused. "Where are you heading?" he asked gently, careful not to sound intrusive. Sarah explained about the small room she hoped to rent the next day and how they were staying temporarily at a crowded shelter across town. Imran thought for a moment, then took out a small card from his wallet. "My cousin runs a community center nearby," he said. "They help families find safe housing and work. No pressure, just an option if you need support." He handed her the card respectfully, making sure she felt in control of her choices. Sarah held the card carefully, as if it were something fragile. For the first time in weeks, she felt a small spark of hope. I don't know how to thank you," she said honestly. Imran smiled softly. "One day, help someone else when you can. That's enough." Amina suddenly ran back toward him and gave him a quick, shy hug around the waist. "You're nice," she said simply. He laughed gently, surprised but touched. As Sarah and Amina walked away, their steps felt lighter. The cold night didn't seem as harsh anymore. Sarah glanced down at the card in her hand and then at her daughter walking beside her, humming quietly. She realized that sometimes kindness arrived quietly, without grand promises, just small actions that made it easier to keep going. Behind them, Imran watched for a moment before turning back toward the diner. He didn't think he had done anything extraordinary. To him, it was just a meal shared with strangers. But for Sarah and Amina, that night had been more than food, it had been a reminder that even in difficult moments, humanity still existed. And as mother and daughter disappeared into the softly lit street, carrying a small paper bag and a renewed sense of possibility, the The night that had begun with silence and hunger ended with warmth, dignity, and the quiet beginning of a new chapter.